Hey designers, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to show you 2 ways how to make a bust cage. Let's get into this. Okay, let's get started. First, we're going to cut the pieces and then serge it. This is the main fabric. Next, cut muslin pieces or any other fabric that you want. I prefer muslin. Then you're going to write your seam allowance all around the pieces, which for me, it's a 1/2 inch. Next up, we're going to cut the interface, and the last thing we're going to cut is the lining. Now we're going to start sewing the pieces, and the main fabric is first. This is what it looks like, nice and clean. The next thing we're going to do is get a pencil because we're going to write on the interface. We're going to write the seam allowance for here, here, and here, not here. On these pieces, we're just going to write the seam allowance in the bottom, over here. And it looks like this. The reason for this is because we're going to cut the pieces off. We're going to cut here and here. On this piece, we're going to cut here, here, and here. This is how it's going to look. It has to be perfect once you iron it down on the muslin. It cannot touch the seam allowance. Next, we're going to take the fabric and we're going to turn it this way and sew it. This is what it looks like. This is the inside and this is the outside. This piece right here, you're going to cut off. Leave this part alone. You're going to cut it down about 1/4 because you don't want it too thick when you start putting the bone in. Next step is the bust caging. This is the boning we're going to use. When you first buy it, it looks like this. And that's exactly how you're going to put it in. Just like that. If you look closely, this is the stitch right here. We're going to put the bone in over the stitch, right over it. Okay, we're not going to put it down here. All right, we're going to put it over it, all the way around. Like that. Before you start sewing, move the bone in just a little bit away from the seam allowance like this. And when you start sewing, sew on the edges of the bone in. Cut the other piece a little bit before the seam allowance. Be careful, don't cut your fabric. This is how it looks. There's a reason for this. You don't want it too close to the seam allowance because you don't want it poking your fabric. And you don't want it to be uneven. Remember, these boning are going to be a little bit uneven. They're not going to be exactly the same size. So you don't want the fabric to be looking funny when you sew it. That's the front. This is when I realized I have to change the thread. Because how am I going to teach you something and you can't even see the thread? So yes, I know, I changed it, guys. Now we're going to sew the other side. Right at the edge, at the corner of the boning. Not in the middle, not on the close to it, just at the edge. You see that little part right here? This part right here, you're going to sew it right there. This is how it looks. This is the first line, and this is the second line. This is how it looks inside. The boning is not moving because you sewed it at the edges. We're going to put the bone in here this time. You can put as much boning as you want. Remember, the more boning, the more structured. When you sew in the boning in the middle, you can either sew it this way, all the way up, make sure that line is straight, or you can sew it the other way, like this. Some people like to sew it this way. But I don't like sewing it this way. I like to sew it this way because I can see that the line is going to be straight from that seam allowance right there. Now let's sew. This is the inside and this is the outside. Let's get another bone in and put it right here, like this. Now the next step you don't have to do, but I like doing it. I usually get a pencil and mark the top because I want the bone in to fit correctly. If you just cut it straight and not slant it to follow the curve on top, then your bone in is going to be way off from the top. Let's sew the last two pieces and then I'm going to show you a trick when it comes down to the curve. This is the part where I see people struggling when it comes down to the curve of the cup. We're going to use this bone in right here. And this is supposed to go all the way around. But you have to remember this bone in does not curve. It's straight. It's made to sew straight. See, it doesn't go to the left and it doesn't go to the right. You have to force that to curve. So I'm going to show you how to do it. These are the tools that you're going to need. A pointy tweezer, and this is called a hemostat. There's different types of tweezers. So you're going to get the one that's pointy, not this one, but this one. This right here has a lock. It looks like scissors, but it's not. It doesn't cut. So you're going to put the bone in here and lock it. Let's get the bone in and tweezer. You're going to scrape as much as you want till you are satisfied with how much wire you need. One day I was trying to figure out how to make the bone in curve, and when I figured it out, I was like, wait. Word? It's like that? Alrighty then, guys. I was excited, okay? So look how it peeled. Really easy. Now you don't need the white piece no more, and that's the wire right there. You're gonna take this, see how it locks? So you're gonna put the bone in inside and you're gonna lock it. Once you lock it, then you can start pulling. Now if you notice, when you're pulling, it's curving. So it depends on how much curve you want. You just keep pulling. You see that? You see how it's curving, guys? Also, you should write on the side you're going to sew on. The reason for that is once you start curving the bone in, the look of the bone in changes and you might not know which side to sew on. So I usually write on it. Then you guys can keep pulling until you're satisfied with the look. The more you curve, the more it looks like this. This is how much I curved it. I didn't think I had to curve it anymore. It looks curved enough just for the cup. So look how easy it is. You just put it in and you sew it. No more struggling, guys. This is the key to making bust cups easier. Before you sew this, make sure you do not put it directly on the seam allowance. Bring it in just a little bit like this. Because if you don't do that, you're going to have problems when you're sewing the bust cup to the corset. This is curved already, so it's going to do exactly what you want it to do. I think that this is the best method for curves. I'm glad I really found a way to do it. And I hope it helps you guys when you're doing the bust cups. It really is that simple. Look at that. Nice and curved. Now let's sew this. This is how it looks close up. You see it's not directly on the seam allowance. It's a little bit before it. We're going to sew the other side. How do you like method 1 so far? This right here is the main fabric. This is satin. I usually interface satin because it's slippery and I like to have structure on it. But for today, I didn't do it. So what you're going to do, you're going to put it on the top of the bust cage and you're going to make sure that every corner matches. Over here, I put pins just to show you. But you're supposed to put the pins on the opposite side. And when you sew, you don't sew it on this side. You sew it on this side. Like this. If you sew it on this side, you're going to have a hard time because the boning is in the way. That's why it's best to sew it on this side. It makes it much easier. Once you do that, it's one piece. Let's do the lining. I sewed it and I also understitched it. I usually do that because I don't want the fabric to move to the front. Sometimes you have to cut some of the lining out because it's big. Before you do that, make sure that the inside is flat. And then you cut whatever pieces you need to cut. The boning is inside and it's nice and hard. I bet you can't tell there's boning in there. That's the seam allowance right there. The reason why I told you don't put the boning too close is because you don't want it to poke out in different directions or make it look different, the shape of the bust cup. So that's why I said bring it down just a little bit. Can you tell there's boning in there? I bet you can't. And that's exactly how yours is going to look. Let's get into method 2, guys. This is similar to method 1, but there's just one thing that's different, and that is the interfacing. This is the regular side of the interfacing, and this is the sticky side. When you sew it this way. Don't forget to take out 1/4 right over here, and also write your seam allowance on the interfacing all around. You're not going to cut it off this time. You're going to leave it. Let's do the cage. This is the bust cage right here. This time I added 2 pieces, the top and the bottom. Next, you're going to take the main fabric and you're going to lay it on the sticky side like this. Make sure all the corners match. Next, we're going to put pins around the cup. We don't want the fabric to move because we're going to lay the cup on something and we're going to iron it down in the middle first. This is where you make your own decision if you want to keep the interface seam allowance. If the fabric is too thick, I suggest that you take out the seam allowance on the interface because when you're sewing it, it's going to be too thick. But this is cotton, so when I'm dealing with cotton, I always leave the seam allowance on the interface because it's not going to be thick when I sew it. This is another way you can do it, but if you do it this way, please be careful because it is hot. It's like a touch and go for me. My fingers are moving. My finger is in the interface, pushed into the fabric so it glues faster. Once the middle is glued, which it looks like it's glued already, then you make your decision if you want to take the seam allowance out because now you're going to take the pins out. I already made my decision. I'm keeping the seam allowance, but this will be the time for you to make your decision if you want to take it because the middle is going to be glued. It's not going to move. Once you feel like the middle is glued, you can take the pins out and you can iron the seam allowances all around. This is how it looks. It becomes one piece, is glued together. Next, you're going to sew the lining. This is how it looks. With these cups, you don't need underwire. You can put it if you want, but you don't really need it. All right, designers, if you want to know about boning, here's a video for you, and I will see you in the next one. Don't forget to practice, practice, practice. Bye, designers.